Emma Hayes stood on a cold corner downtown, her worn easel displaying paintings of sunrises she'd never see, selling art to afford chemotherapy that might save her life. When a man and his daughter stopped to admire her work, she wrapped a small painting of a golden sunrise for $20, touched by the girl's delight, never knowing that the quiet stranger in ordinary clothes was Michael Peterson, a billionaire tech entrepreneur who'd lost his wife to the same disease 3 years earlier, a man so hollowed by grief he'd forgotten why life mattered. Until this moment, when he saw in Emma's eyes something he'd been desperately searching for, a reason to fight back against the darkness, to choose hope again. To finally live. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. The November wind cut through the downtown streets like a blade. But Emma Hayes had learned to stop shivering. She arrived at her corner at 7 in the morning, just as she did every Saturday, carrying her worn canvas bag filled with paintings wrapped in newspaper, her easel slung over her shoulder like a soldier's rifle. The metal legs of the easel scraped against the concrete as she set it up, the sound swallowed by the rumble of traffic and the indifferent footsteps of people rushing past. Her corner sat between a shuttered pawnshop and a bodega with iron bars on the windows. In a neighborhood where hope came at a discount and dreams were sold by the pound, Emma's fingers, thin and pale, moved with practiced efficiency as she arranged her paintings on the small folding table she'd bought at a thrift store for $8. Each painting was a window into another world. Canvases filled with sunrises over meadows she'd never walked through, oceans she'd never seen, gardens where flowers bloomed in impossible colors. Her threadbare coat, a faded navy peacoat with buttons that no longer matched, hung loose on her frame. She'd lost 20 pounds since her diagnosis 4 months ago. Stage 3. The doctor had said, the words falling like stones into still water. Lymphoma. Treatable. Possibly curable. Definitely expensive. The bills had arrived in waves, each one higher than the last. Co-pays and percentages and deductibles that turned into numbers that made her hands shake. $14,000. That's what she owed, and that was just for the treatments she'd already received. She had 6 more months of chemotherapy ahead of her. Maybe more if the cancer didn't respond. Emma touched the medical bracelet hidden beneath her coat sleeve. A plastic reminder of Tuesday's session, when the poison had dripped into her veins for 3 hours while she'd sketched sunrise number 47 on a paper napkin. A businessman walked past, barely glancing at her work. A young couple stopped, pointed at a painting of a lighthouse, whispered to each other, then moved on. An elderly woman with a shopping cart paused, studied a small canvas of wildflowers, then shook her head and continued down the sidewalk. Emma smiled at each of them anyway, her dignity intact, her hope carefully guarded like a candle flame in the wind. By noon, she'd sold 2 paintings for $15 each. $30 closer to survival, $30 closer to seeing spring. Emma's Tuesdays and Thursdays began in the oncology ward on the 4th floor of Mercy General Hospital, where the chairs were vinyl and the walls were painted a color someone had optimistically called healing beige. She'd arrive at 6 in the morning, when the city was still gray and the nurses were still brewing their first pot of coffee. The needle sliding into her port was a practiced violation, the IV bag hanging above her like a transparent promise, chemicals dripping into her bloodstream with mechanical precision. The nausea started 20 minutes in, a rolling wave that turned her stomach inside out. But Emma had learned to breathe through it, to focus on a spot on the ceiling and count backwards from 100. She never complained. The other patients in the ward, some twice her age, some half alive already, didn't need to hear her fear. By 9, she'd be released, stumbling into a taxi she couldn't afford, clutching a paper bag in case the sickness won. Her apartment was a studio on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades, a single room with a kitchenette in the corner and a bathroom the size of a closet. But the northern window caught the morning light perfectly, and that was all Emma needed. Mrs. Chen, her landlord, lived on the 1st floor and had stopped knocking about the rent 3 weeks ago. The elderly woman, bent with age but sharp with kindness, would leave containers of soup outside Emma's door, still warm, never mentioning the $1,500 Emma owed. Emma's walls were covered in paintings, dozens of them, taped and tacked and leaning against every surface. Sunrises in amber and gold, meadows where wildflowers grew in defiant bursts of color, oceans that stretched toward horizons filled with light. Not a single shadow, not one dark corner, not a hint of the disease eating through her lymph nodes. This was Emma's philosophy, forged in the fire of her diagnosis and tempered by every morning she woke up breathing. Create beauty to remember why life matters. Paint the world you want to live in. Fill the darkness with light until the light becomes real. Every brushstroke was an argument against despair. Every sunrise, a declaration of war against the cancer trying to steal her future. She painted hope because hope was a choice, and choosing it was the bravest thing she knew how to do. Michael Peterson's penthouse occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city that stretched for miles in every direction. The furniture was Italian, the art was original, the kitchen was marble and chrome. All of it assembled by an interior designer who'd been paid handsomely to create a space that felt like home. She'd failed. The penthouse was a mausoleum, beautiful and cold, every surface perfect and untouched, a monument to success that felt like failure. Michael had built an empire from lines of code and venture capital, turned a startup in his garage into a technology company worth $3 billion. He employed 4,000 people, disrupted an industry, appeared on magazine covers with headlines that called him visionary, innovative, the future. None of it meant anything anymore. 3 years ago, Catherine had died in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and broken promises. Her hand in his, her breath slowing until it stopped, the cancer taking her piece by piece until nothing remained but memories, and the crushing weight of a world that kept spinning without her. He'd tried to keep living, went to work, closed deals, smiled for the cameras, pretended the hole in his chest wasn't visible to everyone around him. But late at night, in the silence of his empty penthouse, Michael knew the truth. He was a ghost in an expensive suit, going through the motions, waiting for permission to stop. His only light was Sophie, 7 years old, with Catherine's green eyes and her gentle smile. But even Sophie had grown subdued, quieter than a child should be, her laughter rare and precious as gold. She missed her mother in ways she couldn't articulate, and Michael didn't know how to fill that absence. He bought her everything, gave her the best schools, the best nannies, trips to Disneyland and Paris and anywhere she wanted. But he couldn't give her what she needed most. He couldn't give her back her mother. He couldn't even give her a father who remembered how to truly live. The penthouse was silent except for the hum of expensive appliances and the distant sound of Sophie playing in her room. Michael stood at the window, looking down at the city below, feeling nothing, wondering if this numbness would last forever. Michael's therapist had suggested, with the careful diplomacy of someone paid $300 an hour, that he try living normally for a day. Take Sophie somewhere you wouldn't usually go, Dr. Morrison had said. No drivers, no reservations, no itinerary. Just walk. See what happens. So, on a Saturday morning in November, Michael pulled on jeans and a plain gray sweater, clothes that made him look like anyone else, and took Sophie's small hand in his. They left the Meridian Tower on foot, walking past the boutiques and art galleries of the financial district, past the restaurants where Michael's assistant made reservations, past the carefully manicured world he inhabited. They walked until the buildings grew shorter and the streets grew grittier, until they found themselves in a neighborhood where bodegas outnumbered banks and graffiti was considered decoration. Sophie, usually so quiet, began to wake up. Her steps quickened, her eyes widened. Her hand squeezed his as she pointed at a street musician playing guitar, at a dog being walked by a teenager, at the smells coming from a taco truck. "Daddy, look!" She tugged him toward a cluster of vendor stalls and folding tables that lined the sidewalk, a makeshift market where people sold everything from used books to handmade jewelry. Michael followed, feeling strangely foreign in this landscape. like an astronaut walking on an unfamiliar planet. And then Sophie stopped, her breath catching, her finger pointing toward a corner where a young woman stood beside an easel. Even from 30 feet away, Michael could see the colors, brilliant golds and oranges, purples that seemed to pulse with light, blues that looked like they'd been stolen from impossible skies. The paintings were small but fierce, each one a defiant burst of beauty against the gray concrete and faded brick. Sophie pulled harder on his hand, practically running now, drawn to the art like a moth to flame. Michael's world had been grayscale for 3 years, muted and monochrome, every day bleeding into the next without distinction. But those paintings burned with color, with life, with something he'd forgotten existed. Hope, maybe, or joy, or the stubborn insistence that beauty mattered even when the world insisted otherwise. Sophie's small hand slipped from Michael's grip as she darted forward, her shoes slapping against the pavement, all her usual reserve forgotten. She stopped directly in front of a painting no larger than a sheet of paper, her face tilted upward, transfixed. The canvas showed a sunrise breaking over a field of wildflowers, gold bleeding into pink, light spilling across the horizon like a promise being kept. Emma turned at the sound of approaching footsteps, and despite the exhaustion carved into her features, her smile was immediate and genuine. She set down the paintbrush she'd been cleaning and knelt on the cold concrete, bringing herself to eye level with the little girl who stood mesmerized before her work. "Do you like that one?" Emma asked, her voice soft, no condescension in it, speaking to Sophie as though she were a person whose opinion truly mattered. Sophie nodded, unable to form words, her small fingers reaching out but stopping just short of touching the canvas. Michael hung back, standing at a distance, watching. He noticed everything, the way Emma's coat hung loose on a frame that had clearly been fuller once, the translucent quality of her skin, pale in a way that spoke of sickness rather than simply fair complexion, the medical bracelet on her left wrist, partially hidden by her sleeve but visible when she moved, the plastic band catching the light. Her hands trembled slightly as she gestured toward the painting, a tremor she tried to hide. But more than the signs of illness, Michael noticed her kindness. It wasn't performed or calculated. It was instinctual. The way she smiled at his daughter, the way she waited patiently for Sophie to find her words, the gentle way she spoke. "Would you like to hold it?" Emma asked. "You can, if you're careful. Sometimes paintings like to be held. They want to know they matter to someone." Sophie's eyes went wide with wonder and responsibility. She nodded solemnly, and Emma carefully lifted the small canvas, placing it in Sophie's outstretched hands. "Feel how light it is? That's because it's full of morning. Mornings don't weigh very much." Sophie cradled the painting like it was made of glass and dreams, staring at the sunrise as though she'd never seen anything so beautiful in her life. Michael felt something crack inside his chest, a fissure in the ice that had frozen around his heart. He hadn't seen Sophie look at anything with such pure joy in 3 years. "Daddy," Sophie whispered, finally finding her voice, turning to look at Michael with those green eyes that were so much like Catherine's. "Can I have this one, please?" Michael stepped forward, finally joining them at the small table. He glanced at the handwritten price tag taped to the corner of the painting. $20. He looked at the other canvases arranged carefully on the table, each one a small masterpiece of color and light. None priced above $30. His trained eye, sharpened by years of evaluating worth and potential, recognized immediately that these paintings were undervalued by a factor of 10, maybe 20. The technique was skilled, the composition sophisticated, the emotional resonance undeniable. These belonged in galleries, not on a street corner. "Of course you can, sweetheart," he said quietly. Emma smiled, starting to wrap the painting in newspaper, but Sophie stopped her. "Wait, how did you make it look like that? Like hope?" Emma paused, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. She knelt again beside Sophie, pointing at the canvas. "See where the gold meets the pink? I mixed cadmium yellow with just a tiny bit of crimson. That's the color of hope, I think. Warm but gentle. And the way the light spreads across the flowers, that's called glazing. You put down thin layers, one over another, until the light seems to come from inside the painting itself. "It's so pretty," Sophie breathed. Then, holding the painting close to her chest, she added, "It makes me think of my mommy. She liked sunrises." Michael saw the tears glisten in Emma's eyes before she blinked them away. Her hand went instinctively to Sophie's shoulder, a gentle touch, full of understanding that came from somewhere deep and painful. "Then this painting was meant for you," Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your mommy sounds like she was very wise. Only wise people love sunrises." Emma reached for a small sketch pad, tore off a page with a quick pencil drawing of a butterfly, and pressed it into Sophie's free hand. "This is a gift. Keep it with the sunrise. Butterflies and hope go together." Michael pulled out his wallet, his hand trembling as he extracted a $20 bill. When he handed it to Emma, their fingers touched briefly, and he felt the coldness of her skin, the fragility of her grip. "Thank you," he managed, the words inadequate for what he was feeling. "You've made her very happy." All week, Michael couldn't stop thinking about the woman on the corner. Her face appeared in board meetings when he should have been focused on quarterly projections. Her trembling hands haunted him during conference calls. The way she'd touched Sophie's shoulder, that moment of shared grief, passing between a stranger and a 7-year-old girl, played on loop in his mind at 3 a.m. when sleep refused to come. Sophie had hung the sunrise painting in her bedroom, directly across from her bed, so it was the first thing she saw every morning. She talked about the nice painting lady constantly, asking when they could visit again, wondering if the lady had painted any butterflies or flowers or oceans. Michael tried to research her. He searched street artist downtown and painter near bodega, and scrolled through pages of results that led nowhere. No website, no social media presence, no gallery representation. She was invisible to the digital world, existing only in that small corner of concrete and cold wind. By Friday, he'd made a decision. Saturday morning, he and Sophie returned to the same neighborhood, retracing their steps through the streets that separated his world from hers. Sophie clutched his hand, excited, chattering about showing the lady how she'd hung the sunrise painting in her room. But when they reached the corner, Emma wasn't there. An elderly Chinese woman sat in a folding chair beside the easel, a thick shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her weathered hands holding a thermos of tea. The paintings were arranged on the table, but fewer than before, and the woman watched them with sharp, knowing eyes. "Excuse me," Michael said, Sophie hiding slightly behind his leg. "We're looking for the artist. The young woman who's usually here?" Mrs. Chen studied him for a long moment, assessing. "Emma had bad treatment day. Very sick. I watch her stand today." The word treatment hit Michael like a physical blow. He'd suspected, seeing the medical bracelet, the pallor, the weight loss, but hearing it confirmed made it real. "Treatment for what?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Cancer," Mrs. Chen said simply, no drama in her voice. Just fact. She very brave girl. Never complain. But Thursdays are hard. Takes her 2 days to recover sometimes. "Emma?" Michael repeated, filing away the name. "What's her full name?" "Emma Hayes. She good tenant. 3 months behind on rent, but I don't push. She needs to stay alive more than I need money." Mrs. Chen sipped her tea, her gaze sharp. "You want to buy painting?" Michael felt the pull again, that inexplicable need to help, to do something, to not let another person slip away into the darkness. But how could he help without seeming intrusive, without turning her struggle into his project? Without making it about his own need for redemption? That night, Sophie refused to go to sleep until Michael came to her room and looked at the sunrise painting with her. She lay in bed, her small body curled under blankets printed with stars, staring at the canvas on her wall. "Do you think the painting lady is okay?" she asked, her voice small in the darkness. Mrs. Chen said she was sick. Michael sat on the edge of her bed, his throat tight. "I think she's fighting very hard to get better." "Like Mommy fought?" Sophie's question was a knife between his ribs. "Yes, sweetheart, like Mommy fought. Sophie was quiet for a moment, then said, "I want to see her again. Can we go back? I want to tell her thank you for making something that reminds me of Mommy." Michael kissed his daughter's forehead, smoothing her hair back. "We'll go back. I promise." After Sophie fell asleep, Michael sat in his home office, the city lights spreading below him like a constellation of broken promises. He stared at his laptop screen without seeing it, wrestling with questions that had no clean answers. Why did he care so much about this stranger? Was this truly about helping someone in need, or was it about filling the emptiness inside himself? Was he drawn to Emma because she was suffering the way Catherine had suffered, because helping her might somehow redeem his failure to save his wife? The questions circled like vultures, but beneath them was a simpler truth. Sophie had smiled, really smiled, with light in her eyes for the first time in months. And Emma, dying or not, sick or not, poor or not, had created something beautiful and given it freely to a child who needed beauty. That mattered. Whatever his motivations, that mattered. By Sunday evening, Michael had crafted a plan. He would commission a larger painting, something substantial for Sophie's room. He'd pay well, but not so much that it seemed like charity. He'd frame it as a father wanting quality artwork for his daughter, nothing more. It would give Emma money she clearly needed while preserving her dignity, her agency, her right to earn rather than receive. It wasn't perfect. His motivations weren't pure. But maybe, Michael thought, purity wasn't the point. Maybe the point was simply showing up, reaching out, choosing to see another person's humanity and responding to it. Maybe that was enough. The following Saturday, Emma was back at her corner, thinner than before. A wool hat covering hair that had started to fall out in clumps. She was arranging paintings with slow, deliberate movements, each gesture careful, as though her body were something fragile she had to handle with caution. Michael approached with Sophie, who ran ahead and threw her small arms around Emma in an impulsive hug. Emma's surprise melted into a smile that transformed her exhausted face. "Hello again, sunshine. Did you hang your painting?" "Right across from my bed," Sophie announced proudly. "I see it every morning when I wake up." Michael stepped forward, hands in his pockets, trying to appear casual when his heart was hammering. "I was wondering if you take commissions. I'd like something larger for Sophie's room, maybe 20 by 30 inches. Something with the same feeling as the sunrise, but your vision, whatever you feel inspired to create." Emma's expression shifted, uncertainty flickering across her features. She glanced at her hands, at the tremor she couldn't quite control. "I'm not sure I can promise a timeline right now. My schedule is unpredictable." "No rush," Michael said quickly. "Take whatever time you need. Weeks, months, whatever works for you. It would be expensive," Emma said, her voice quiet but firm. "A canvas that size, with the time involved." $500, Michael offered. "Half now, half on completion." Emma's breath caught. She knew, he could see it in her eyes, that 500 was a fraction of what a painting that size should cost. Her pride warred visibly with something else, something desperate. Her hand went unconsciously to her coat pocket where, Michael guessed, unpaid bills were folded and refolded until the creases threatened to tear. 3 months behind on rent. Mrs. Chen's kindness wouldn't last forever. Next week's treatment required a $200 copay she didn't have. The numbers were drowning her, pulling her under, and here was a stranger offering a lifeline disguised as a business transaction. "I'll do my absolute best work," Emma said finally, her voice thick with emotion and determination. "I promise you that. It might take time, but it will be worth the wait." Michael pulled 5 crisp $100 bills from his wallet, placing them carefully on the table between them. "I know it will be. Take care of yourself, Emma. The painting can wait." "You can't!" Michael began returning every Saturday, telling himself it was to check on the painting's progress, knowing in the quiet honesty of his thoughts that it was something else entirely. He was drawn to Emma's spirit, the way a drowning man is drawn to air, desperate and instinctual. He watched her paint through hands that trembled so badly some days she had to stop and breathe, pressing her palms flat against the table until the shaking subsided. He witnessed her pause mid-brushstroke, her face going pale, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cold, as waves of pain or nausea rolled through her. She would close her eyes, count silently to 10, then return to the canvas as though nothing had happened. She never complained. Not once. Not about the cold that seeped into her bones, not about the treatments that were poisoning her to save her, not about the fear that must have lived inside her like a second heartbeat. They began talking, carefully. Like two people approaching a frightened animal. Afraid any sudden movement might break the spell, Michael asked about her technique, her inspirations, why she chose certain colors. Emma asked about Sophie, about what made a 7-year-old laugh, about the things children needed to hear. He never mentioned his wealth. She never mentioned her diagnosis directly. They circled around the truth of who they were, speaking instead about art and light and the stubborn beauty of sunrises. Sophie came sometimes, bursting into Emma's corner with stories about school, about her friend Madison who had a loose tooth, about the science project on butterflies she was working on. Emma listened like Sophie's words were poetry, asking questions, laughing at the funny parts, treating a child's chatter like it was the most important conversation in the world. "You're good with her," Michael observed one Saturday, watching Emma show Sophie how to blend 2 colors on a palette. "Children make sense to me," Emma said simply. "They haven't learned to hide what they feel yet. They're honest about joy." The painting was taking shape on a canvas she kept covered when she wasn't working. Michael caught glimpses. A garden at dawn, flowers opening to light. A small figure that might have been a child standing in the golden glow. It was going to be extraordinary. But more than the painting, Michael found himself treasuring these Saturday mornings. These moments of connection. This feeling that he was waking up after years of sleep. On a Saturday in late December, with the first snow beginning to fall, Michael finally asked the question that had been building inside him for weeks. Emma was adding delicate touches to a cluster of morning glories in the painting, her brush moving with precision despite the cold that made her fingers stiff. "Why do you paint such hopeful scenes?" The question came out raw, unfiltered. "When things are so dark, why do you fill every canvas with light?" Emma set down her brush, looking at him fully for the first time that morning. Her eyes, despite the exhaustion carved into her features, were clear and steady. "Because hope isn't about circumstances, Mr. Peterson. It's about choice. Every sunrise I paint reminds me I chose to see beauty today. Not tomorrow, not someday when things get better. Today, right now, in the middle of everything terrible and uncertain and frightening, I choose to see something worth living for." She gestured at the painting, at the garden coming to life under her hands. "The cancer doesn't get to decide what I create. The bills don't get to decide what I see when I close my eyes. The fear doesn't get to paint my canvases. I do. That's the only power I have left, and I'm not giving it up. I choose the sunrise. Every single day, I choose it." Michael felt something crack inside his chest, a fracture running through the ice that had encased his heart for 3 years. Emma's words were a hammer striking frozen stone, and suddenly he could see what he'd been doing. He'd been choosing despair. Every day since Catherine died, he'd chosen the darkness. Wrapped himself in grief like a blanket. Told himself that numbness was the only honest response to loss. But Emma, facing her own possible death, chose differently. She chose beauty. She chose hope. She chose to create light even while standing in shadow. And if she could make that choice while poison dripped through her veins and her body betrayed her, what excuse did Michael have? He was alive, healthy, wealthy beyond measure, and he'd been wasting it, hiding from it, treating his life like a sentence to serve rather than a gift to unwrap. "Thank you," he whispered, the words inadequate but sincere. I needed to hear that. Emma had begun to notice things about Michael Peterson. Small details that didn't quite fit the picture of an ordinary father taking his daughter for weekend outings. The watch, for instance. He'd forgotten to remove it one Saturday, and when his sleeve pulled back as he reached for his coffee, she caught the glint of it. Not a department store timepiece, but something elegant and understated, the kind of craftsmanship that whispered rather than shouted. It was gone the next week, replaced by a simple leather band watch that looked deliberately ordinary. The way he handled money, too. No hesitation, no counting, no mental calculation of whether he could afford something. When Sophie wanted a pretzel from a street vendor, he pulled out a $50 bill without blinking, waved away the change. Most people in this neighborhood counted their dollars carefully. Michael treated money like it was air. Abundant and unconsidered, and the way he spoke sometimes, catching himself mid-sentence. "I have a business obligation on Tuesday" would shift to, "I have to work late on Tuesday." References to "my assistant" became someone at work. He deflected personal questions with the skill of someone practiced at guarding privacy, redirecting conversations back to Art or Sophie or the weather with seamless grace. Emma wondered. She couldn't help it. The quality of his clothes, despite their simplicity, the way he stood, the confidence in his posture, the ease of someone accustomed to being listened to, the expensive smartphone he tucked away quickly when she glanced at it, the car service that sometimes waited at the corner, black and gleaming, that he'd wave off when he saw her looking. Successful small business owner, she decided. Maybe a lawyer or a consultant, someone who'd done well for himself but liked to keep weekends casual, someone who wanted his daughter to see the world beyond whatever bubble they lived in. She didn't pry. Everyone had their secrets, their private griefs, their reasons for keeping parts of themselves hidden. She had her own secrets, after all. The extent of her medical debt, the nights she cried into her pillow, the terror that woke her at 3 in the morning when she couldn't stop imagining the cancer winning. Michael didn't correct her assumptions. When she mentioned "your business" in passing, he nodded and changed the subject. When Sophie started to say something about Daddy's office building, he gently squeezed her hand, and she fell quiet. Trained in discretion beyond her years, they both held their truths carefully, offering only what felt safe, building a friendship on the foundation of what they chose to share rather than what they chose to hide. It happened on a Saturday in early January, when the air was sharp enough to cut and Emma had been painting for 3 hours without a break. Michael and Sophie arrived to find her working on the final details of the garden painting, her concentration absolute, her brush moving across the canvas with trembling determination. "It's almost finished," Emma said, smiling at them, but her smile was strained. Her skin the color of old paper. "Just a few more touches and—" Her words stopped. Her eyes went unfocused. The brush slipped from her fingers, clattering against the pavement, and Emma's body folded like a marionette with cut strings. Michael lunged forward, catching her before she hit the concrete, her weight frighteningly light in his arms. Sophie screamed, her small voice high with panic, but Michael was already lowering Emma gently to the ground, his hand supporting her head, his other hand reaching for his phone. "No," Emma whispered, her eyes fluttering open, unfocused. "No ambulance. Can't afford. I don't care," Michael said, his voice sharp with fear and authority. He was already dialing, already barking their location to the emergency dispatcher. Sophie knelt beside them, tears streaming down her face, holding Emma's cold hand. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Michael rode with Emma, while his driver, summoned with a single text, took Sophie home with promises that everything would be okay. At the emergency room, when the admitting nurse asked about insurance and next of kin, Michael didn't hesitate. "I'm family. Run whatever tests she needs. Do whatever treatment is necessary. I'll handle the billing." Emma was too weak to argue, drifting in and out of consciousness as they wheeled her away. Michael paced the waiting room for 2 hours, his carefully maintained disguise forgotten, making phone calls that summoned the hospital's best oncologist from his Saturday afternoon off. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression was grave. "Mr. Peterson? The cancer has progressed significantly. Her lymph nodes are more compromised than her previous scans indicated. She needs aggressive treatment immediately. We're talking high-dose chemotherapy, possibly radiation, maybe a stem cell transplant. Without it—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Michael's hands clenched into fists. Then start treatment. Today. Now. Whatever she needs. The costs will be substantial. Easily 6 figures. Possibly more. I don't care about the costs, Michael said, his voice breaking. Save her. Please. Just save her. Michael sent Sophie home with his assistant, Rebecca, who promised hot chocolate and her mother's lasagna and all of Sophie's favorite movies. He stayed in the chair beside Emma's hospital bed as afternoon faded into evening, as the fluorescent lights flickered on and the building settled into its nighttime rhythm of beeping machines and whispered conversations. Emma woke sometime after 8, her eyes struggling to focus in the dim light. Michael sat slouched in the vinyl chair, his head in his hands, looking haunted in a way that had nothing to do with the sterile hospital room and everything to do with ghosts only he could see. Why are you still here? Emma whispered, her voice rough from intubation and fear. Michael lifted his head, and in his eyes Emma saw something raw and unguarded, all his careful deflections stripped away. He looked at her for a long moment, then spoke, his words halting and honest in a way that made them almost painful to hear. Because 3 years ago, I sat in a chair like this and watched my wife die. His voice cracked on the word wife. Catherine. She had ovarian cancer, stage 4 by the time they found it. I sat beside her bed for weeks, holding her hand, telling her everything would be okay, making promises I couldn't keep. And I couldn't save her. I had all the money in the world, all the resources, the best doctors, the most advanced treatments, and none of it mattered. She died anyway, and I couldn't do anything but watch. Emma's eyes filled with tears. She reached for his hand, her fingers weak but insistent. When I saw you collapse today, Michael continued, all I could think was, not again. Not another person slipping away while I stand by helplessly. I know I'm a stranger to you. I know I have no right to insert myself into your life. But maybe I can help you. Maybe this time I can do something that matters. Maybe saving you can't bring Catherine back, but it can mean her death wasn't completely meaningless. That something good can come from all this pain. You're not a stranger. Emma whispered. Not anymore. Michael took a shaky breath, knowing the moment for half-truths had passed. Emma, there's something you need to know. My full name is Michael Peterson. I own Techverse Solutions. The company is worth about $3 billion. I'm not just someone who can afford to help. I'm someone who can afford to do whatever it takes. Emma's expression shifted from confusion to shock to something harder. She pulled her hand away from his, her eyes flashing with anger despite her weakness. $3 billion? You've been lying to me this entire time? Coming to my corner in your costume, pretending to be just another father, watching me struggle while you had the power to. Her voice broke. Is this pity? Am I your charity project? Your way to feel good about yourself? No, Michael said urgently, leaning forward. Emma, please listen. Did you commission the painting because you actually wanted it, or because you felt sorry for the dying girl on the street corner? Tears streamed down her face. Was any of it real? All of it was real. Michael's voice was raw with desperation. Yes, I hid who I was. Yes, I should have been honest sooner. But I wasn't playing a game. I was trying to remember how to be human again. Emma, I've been empty since Catherine died. Completely hollow. Going through motions, existing but not living. Building empires that mean nothing. Accumulating wealth that brings no joy. I was a ghost in an expensive suit, waiting for permission to stop pretending. He stood, pacing, his words tumbling out in a confession 3 years in the making. Then I met you, and you were dying, actually dying, and you chose to paint sunrises. You chose hope. You reminded me why Catherine fought so hard, why she wanted every extra day, every extra hour. Not for the big moments, but for the small ones. For beauty, for connection, for the choice to see light even in darkness. Michael turned back to her, his eyes red. You're not my project. You're not my charity case. You're my reminder that life is worth fighting for. That choosing hope isn't naive. It's the bravest thing a person can do. You saved me before I ever had the chance to help you. So, yes, I want to pay for your treatment, not because I pity you, but because the world needs more people like you in it. Because Sophie needs you. Because I need you. Emma lay in the hospital bed after Michael left, staring at the ceiling tiles and fighting a war inside herself. Pride versus survival. Dignity versus desperation. The right to struggle alone versus the grace to accept help. Michael hadn't pushed. He'd simply placed his business card on the table beside her bed, told her to call him when she was ready, and walked out, leaving her to decide her own fate. That small gesture of respect meant more than he could know. All her life, Emma had taken care of herself. When her parents died in a car accident when she was 19, she'd finished art school on loans and determination. When the cancer came, she'd faced it alone, painting her way through terror because that was what she knew how to do. Accepting help felt like surrender, like admitting she wasn't strong enough to save herself. But was pride worth dying for? Emma thought about her paintings, dozens of them still unsold, gathering dust in her tiny apartment. She thought about the garden painting for Sophie, almost finished, waiting for her hands to add the final touches. She thought about sunrises she hadn't seen yet, canvases she hadn't painted, moments of beauty she might create if given the chance. She thought about Sophie's face when she'd held that first painting, the pure joy in a child's eyes. She thought about Mrs. Chen, who'd been patient and kind when she didn't have to be. She thought about the people who might need to see a sunrise painted by someone who'd chosen hope in the darkest moments. The world didn't owe her anything. But maybe, just maybe, she owed the world more paintings. At 2 a.m, Emma reached for her phone with trembling fingers and dialed the number on Michael's card. He answered on the first ring, his voice alert, as though he'd been waiting. "Michael," she whispered, "I want to live. If you're offering help, I'll take it. But I'm paying you back somehow. I don't know how yet, but I will. This isn't charity. It's a loan. A partnership. Something." She heard his breath catch, then release. "Whatever you want to call it, Emma. Whatever helps you accept it. Just live. That's all I'm asking. Just choose to live." By Monday morning, Michael had assembled the best oncology team on the East Coast. Dr. Sarah Chen, who'd pioneered treatments for aggressive lymphomas. Dr. James Morrison, a radiation specialist whose protocols had saved hundreds of lives. A team of nurses, specialists, and support staff who treated Emma not as a charity case, but as a patient who deserved every fighting chance. Emma moved from the emergency room to a private suite, with windows overlooking the city. Michael handled every bill, every copay, every medication cost without discussion. When Emma tried to talk about money, he simply said, "Let's focus on keeping you alive first. We can argue about the rest later." But Emma had her own terms. "I'm finishing your painting," she insisted, even as they prepared her for the first round of intensive chemotherapy. "And I'm creating more. For Sophie, for your home, for wherever you want them. This is my payment." "Let me do this." Michael didn't argue. He understood that she needed to give something back, to maintain her sense of self in a situation where so much control had been stripped away. So he agreed, and Emma painted between treatments, her hands steadier on some days than others, her determination unwavering. Over the following months, Michael visited between board meetings, arriving in his suit and tie, loosening his collar as he settled into the chair beside Emma's bed. Sometimes he brought work, tapping away on his laptop while she dozed. Sometimes he just sat, keeping vigil, making sure she wasn't alone. Sophie came often, bringing homework and stories and laughter that filled the sterile hospital room with life. She'd curl up on Emma's bed, carefully avoiding the IV lines, and chatter about school and friends and the butterflies she was studying. Emma listened like Sophie's words were oxygen, smiling through nausea and exhaustion, because this child needed her present. They became an unlikely family, the three of them. Michael, who'd forgotten how to hope, Emma, who'd never stopped choosing it. Sophie, who needed both of them to remember that love didn't end with loss, that family could be built from broken pieces. They filled each other's empty spaces. Michael's wealth gave Emma a fighting chance. Emma's spirit reminded Michael why life mattered, and Sophie, beautiful Sophie, gave them both a reason to keep choosing the sunrise, day after difficult day, painting a future none of them had dared to imagine. The anniversary of Catherine's death fell on a Thursday in March. The same day Emma was scheduled for her most aggressive treatment yet. Michael arrived at the hospital early, his face drawn, shadows under his eyes that spoke of a sleepless night, haunted by memories 3 years old. Emma was already pale and shaking from the pre-medications when he walked in. She saw his face and knew immediately. "What day is it?" she asked softly. 3 years ago today," Michael said, his voice barely audible. "I watched my wife take her last breath. The treatment was brutal. Emma's body fought the poison meant to save her, and Michael sat helpless beside her bed, watching another woman he cared about suffer. Watching history repeat itself with cruel precision. Something inside him finally broke. He put his head in his hands and wept. Not the quiet, controlled tears of a man maintaining composure, but raw, gasping sobs that came from a place he'd kept locked for 3 years. All the grief he'd never properly processed. All the anger at a universe that took beautiful people too soon. All the guilt for surviving when Catherine hadn't, poured out of him in waves. Emma, weak and trembling, reached for his hand with fingers that could barely grip. "Michael," she whispered, "look at me." He lifted his head, his face wet with tears. "She'd want you to live too," Emma said, each word an effort. "Not just exist, not just go through motions, live. Choose the sunrise. Choose joy. Choose Sophie's laughter and Saturday mornings, and the million small, beautiful things that make life worth fighting for. That's how you honor her, by living the life she couldn't." Sophie appeared in the doorway, brought by Rebecca for her usual visit. She saw her father crying, saw Emma's weakness, and without hesitation crawled onto the hospital bed between them, careful of the wires and tubes. She took Michael's hand in one of hers and Emma's hand in the other. "We're all sad sometimes," Sophie said with the profound simplicity of childhood. "But we're sad together. That makes it better." They sat like that for a long time. 3 people who'd known profound loss, holding each other in the failing light, choosing hope even when hope felt impossible, choosing each other when the world felt too heavy to face alone. 4 months after that Thursday in March, Emma sat in Dr. Chen's office with Michael beside her, both of them holding their breath as the oncologist pulled up the latest scans on her computer screen. The silence stretched like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap. Dr. Chen turned to them, and for the first time in months, she was smiling. "Emma, the treatment worked. The cancer is undetectable. You're in remission." The world stopped. Then started again. Different, brighter, possible. Emma didn't scream or jump or celebrate with wild abandon. She simply covered her face with her hands and cried, her whole body shaking with sobs that were equal parts relief and disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. Michael pulled her into his arms, his own tears falling silent and steady, holding her like she was made of light. "You did it," he whispered. "You chose the sunrise." Emma had been living in Michael's guest house for 2 months, since he'd insisted she needed a stable place to recover between treatments. The small cottage behind his penthouse had been converted into a living space and studio, northern light flooding through skylights he'd had installed. Canvases and paints arranged on custom shelving, everything she needed to create. She'd painted dozens of pieces during her recovery. Not just sunrises now, but gardens and oceans and moments of unexpected beauty, each one infused with the hard-won hope of someone who'd stared into darkness and chosen light anyway. The guest house walls were covered with her work, a testimony to survival rendered in color and brushstrokes. Michael had quietly arranged her first gallery show, pulling strings and making calls, refusing to take any percentage or credit. "This is yours, Emma. Your vision, your courage, your art. I'm just opening a door. You did everything else." The celebration that night was quiet. just the three of them in the guest house. Sophie dancing between the paintings while Emma and Michael sat on the studio floor, exhausted and grateful and profoundly changed by the journey they'd taken together. "Thank you," Emma said, the words inadequate for what she felt. "Thank you," Michael answered, "for reminding me what it means to really live." Sophie threw her arms around both of them, and they held each other as the sun set outside the windows, painting the sky in golds and pinks. Another sunrise waiting on the other side of night. 6 months later, on a warm evening in September, the Hartwell Gallery in the heart of the city blazed with light and life. Emma stood near the entrance, wearing a simple blue dress, her hair grown back in soft waves, color returned to her cheeks, watching as hundreds of people moved through the space admiring her work. Every wall held a painting, each one a window into her journey, her choice to see beauty when darkness pressed close. Gardens at dawn, oceans catching first light, moments of grace rendered in color and hope. Michael and Sophie stood beside her, beaming with pride that felt like sunlight. Sophie wore a yellow dress and couldn't stop smiling, pointing out her favorite paintings to anyone who would listen. Michael kept his hand on Emma's shoulder, steady and present. The emptiness that had haunted him for 3 years finally filled with something real. The paintings sold within the first hour. Every single one. Red dots appeared beside frames like declarations of victory, collectors and art lovers, recognizing not just technique, but truth. The authenticity of someone who'd painted hope while fighting for her life. But the final piece of the evening was special. Emma had kept it covered until the end. And when she pulled away the cloth, the crowd fell silent. It was the small sunrise painting. The very first one Sophie had fallen in love with on that cold November morning. The $20 painting that had started everything. Sophie had insisted on donating it to be auctioned for cancer research, her small act of giving back. The bidding started at $500. Within minutes, it climbed to $10,000, then $20,000, then $30,000. When the gavel finally fell, the number on the board read $50,000. The buyer, an anonymous collector, wanted the painting to tour hospitals, to remind patients that choosing hope was always possible. Emma donated every penny to the Cancer Research Foundation. She stood at the podium, her voice strong and clear, and told a room full of strangers that she'd learned something profound in her darkest moments. That wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts but in human connection. That one person seeing another's humanity and responding to it could change everything. That love showed up in unexpected places, wearing ordinary clothes, holding a 7-year-old's hand. After the speeches, after the applause, Emma found Michael and Sophie in the crowd and pulled them both into a fierce embrace. "You both saved my life," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Michael held her tight, his own eyes wet. "No, Emma, you saved ours." Sophie squeezed between them, and they stood together in the gallery, surrounded by paintings of light. 3 people who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to paint a different ending. And outside the windows, the sun was setting, gold bleeding into pink, another sunrise waiting just beyond the horizon, because there was always another sunrise for those brave enough to choose it. One act of presence, one moment of seeing another person's struggle and reaching out, one decision to help without expecting anything in return, can change the entire trajectory of a life. Michael could have walked past Emma's corner that November morning. He could have bought the painting and never returned. He could have chosen to stay wrapped in his grief, comfortable in his emptiness, but he chose to see her, to show up, to be present. And Emma could have refused his help, let pride seal her fate, chosen to struggle alone until the struggle consumed her. But she chose to accept grace, to let herself be seen, to believe that connection mattered more than independence. They chose each other. They chose hope. They chose the sunrise. Every single day, that choice is available to all of us. To see the person struggling on the corner, to reach out when someone is drowning, to show up when it's easier to walk past, to paint beauty when darkness presses close. To believe that one life touching another can create ripples that change everything. Choose to see the humanity in strangers. Choose to help when you have the power to make a difference. Choose to accept grace when pride would rather let you fall. Choose the sunrise, even when night seems endless. Because every sunrise is a promise, every dawn is a choice, and every choice to see light, to create beauty, to connect across the distances that separate us, is an act of defiance against everything in this world that tells us to give up, to stay small, to keep walking, to choose despair. Emma Hayes chose to paint sunrises while fighting for her life. Michael Peterson chose to show up for a stranger when grief told him to stay numb. Sophie chose to love openly when loss could have closed her heart. And together, they proved that hope isn't naive. It's the bravest thing we can do. Choose it. Every day, choose the sunrise.